Welcome to the Liberty Show, where we talk about American classical education, and we invite you to join us in the work of forming knowledgeable, virtuous citizens. We're leading a network of schools in Georgia, and my name is Matthew Kirby. I'm the CEO, and we hope that you will enjoy this podcast and ultimately learn more, read more about us at libertyclassicalschools.org. Today, we have the opportunity to spend time with Dr. Matt Stone, who is my colleague now for several years, just over 2 years. He's become a good professional friend and a real friend.
Yeah.
And Dr. Stone, let's dive right in. I'll throw you a softball here and just ask you to kind of tell us about your family history and what led you towards education.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for the opportunity to be here today. I grew up in really small town Michigan, and through a variety of funny coincidences, found my way to Hillsdale College after completing high school. And I hear this story a lot from people as far as how they find out about Hillsdale, but it was really through the imprimis, and my uncle signing me up without my knowledge and getting that in the mail every month and reading the publication and thinking this is the place that I think would be great to study, where I could learn from some of the people who are writing and publishing, and it seems like the type of environment that would be a good place to continue education. So, and I feel like that's where I really began to develop a love of learning, to develop a love of education, and really seeing that education equals job training isn't all there is to it. In fact, there's so much more to it, and that's the beauty in it. And not that I didn't want to have a plan after I graduated from Hillsdale, right? But that the experience of a classical education, a great books education, was actually more about me and forming, my intellect, but also just my personhood, right? My soul, my character. So anyways, that process didn't happen overnight, and I have to apologize to all my freshman year professors. I was not always a very diligent student, but I think that's the beauty in education, right? Is that it has a way of getting to you, and it did for me. Now, all that to say, I was probably still a little unprepared, right? By the time senior year rolled around, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had interest in politics. I had actually interned in Washington, D.C. Between junior and senior year on Capitol Hill, which was really cool. Washington, D.C. was a great place to spend the summer, and Hillsdale had a great program that they were developing. And but anyways, when I got to senior year, I wasn't super focused on what was going to be vocationally next. But I did stumble across the classical school job fair, which was in one of its first or maybe even second years of existence at that time. And it was located in the student center. And so you have to get to lunch to the student center, right? So on my way, I can't really say that I was even planning to go, right? But I stopped, and I just ended up talking to some classical school leaders at that time. And I think the Barney Charter Initiative, it wasn't even quite up. There was some rumblings about something coming. But I had met a number of different schools at that time and came back, right, this time with a resume and the ability to start having more serious conversations, and just felt the doors opening toward that, toward the calling of teaching. And I think about it this is not necessarily advice I would give even my own children, right? But I wasn't necessarily prepared for that day, as in hindsight I should have been. But the pathway was opened, right? And I had the opportunity to meet some great school leaders, to visit some schools in person right around graduation, and ultimately took a position at a charter school just outside Boston. I felt like Boston was just a great place. I mentioned, I grew up in small town Michigan. Boston was like the big city adventure. I felt like my background is history. I thought, what better place in the United States to teach history than Boston? That's right. Literally, where the revolution and where our some of our most fundamental rights and ideas were debated and deliberated. So, what a great opportunity! I'd never been to Boston until then, and so I started teaching right after college, 7th grade history, and had no prior experience in the classroom, no teacher prep work, no student teaching. So when I walked in that 7th grade class of 32 kids, that was my first time in front of students like that, in that setting before, and so it was a year of growing.
A year.
Yeah, and I again, I think a lot about this in our role and my role here at Liberty. But, would I have hired me back then? I don't know.
Right.
I'm really grateful for Dr. McCleary for hiring me, right, and giving me an opportunity. And I always have, I think, some of the same tendencies when I think about candidates. I look for candidates who are eager and excited and passionate. And,
Yeah.
I like to think that I was showing some of those same traits, right, that
Yeah.
I really wanted to take the knowledge that I had, the education that I had at Hillsdale, and find a way to continue to live that life. Um, and the classroom is a great place to do that.
Yeah.
And so even though that year was hard, in just about every way, at the end of the day, I still felt like I could live a life of, that could be focused on the good things, right?
Yeah.
The true and beautiful things. And so,
Yeah.
uh,
All right, let me stop you there. You
Yeah.
touched on so many amazing things
Yes.
that I'd love to dive back into. I love your background. I love your humility. I was thinking through, Hillsdale is a heady place with a big towering mission and serious intellectual pursuits. And I love that you said that you maybe weren't the most conscientious student in your freshman year. You were at the right place.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I am so impressed. I mean, I look back on my own education, having gone to the Naval Academy, and my general sentiment is that I was not mature enough to fully take in and take advantage of all of the opportunities that were available to me in that 4-year period.
That's right.
And it's sort of like maybe you had a little bit of that start at Hillsdale, but you very quickly found your footing, and so to be commended for that. I wonder if you have particular either professors or courses at Hillsdale that stick with you to this day. Are there any that come to mind?
Yeah, for sure. I think, Hillsdale is known for having a really extensive core curriculum that all students have to take. And I could definitely comment on so many courses, upper level, senior level courses that still have impact on me. But I think when I reflect upon what was really instrumental was part of that core curriculum, which
Yeah.
is what what Hillsdale calls like Great Books 101 and 102.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Smith was my professor for both courses. And it was my first time reading the Iliad. It was my first time reading Dante's Inferno. It was my first time reading most of the text in that curriculum. And I just remember so much about that class. I think firstly was Dr. Smith's passion. Just seeing how, Dr. Smith's a brilliant guy, right? And has written extensively on a lot of different subjects. But what joy and passion he had for teaching a bunch of immature college freshmen about the Inferno, right? And it stuck out to me like this guy could really be doing anything, right? He
Yeah.
could be studying and writing and probably talking about books that he might prefer to talk about, right?
Right.
He's teaching this core class, right, with a wide range of students who may or may not appreciate this, but it didn't show, right? And I realized that like you only have this kind of passion if it's for real, right? If you really believe that this is a text worth studying and worth thinking about. And without forcing it, right, he invited us into that conversation. He invited us into that story. And I think when that process happens, it becomes a part of you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't mean to be super abstract, but like I could see in my own self reflecting on, some of the, obviously the characters and the plot development, but just thinking about how that translates into what it meant to be good and what it meant to pursue the truth and do the right thing when it's hard. And all these things that maybe I heard growing up started making a lot more sense in that class, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And my sense is too, as you were applying for that first job in Massachusetts, you're a very thoughtful guy, very pensive. And I imagine that even though you were very inexperienced,
Yeah.
but that your head of school there saw that in
Yeah.
you. And what were some of the key learnings that you had in that challenging first year with 32 seventh graders, I think you said?
Yeah.
Are there things that you derived in that experience that have maybe shaped how you're executing your role today?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I learned pretty quickly the importance of just being able to manage classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that term classroom management, there's so much to unpack even with that. You could spend a long time just thinking about what exactly that means.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned that, I could have prepared the greatest lesson and I could have been the most passionate person about the Battle of Bunker Hill, for example.
Mhm.
But if I wasn't able to deliver it to the students, then it's not that it wouldn't matter, but it would not have what I was hoping would have happened, right? The ability to draw students into the conversation and to allow them to see that event for what it was and
Mhm.
examples of heroism or failure in some cases, right?
Mhm.
Lack of preparedness, or the fact that it was that literally 4 miles from where I was. We were, right?
Right.
Like literally in our backyard that we might drive past where that battle happened and not even realize it, right? And how significant that is, right? To think about that. And so I was really, I would say, like most first year teachers, had some ups and downs with classroom management, but really benefited from not a formal mentor teacher, but really two different teachers who informally took me under their wing and just were willing to sit with me after school. And I would just be blown away by the fact that the student who I was having difficulty with, I would walk by their class and see the same student sitting there engaged and participating, and I would just be like, how is this happening? How are you able to do this with this student? And
Mhm.
um, I think the thing I had to really learn was, I was the one that was going to be the instructional leader of the classroom, right? It was easy for me at first to say, well, the kids won't listen, the kids won't do this, but then I had to sort of accept that, no, this is my role as the adult and as the teacher to sort of set the expectation
Yeah.
and set the stage for them. So, and so once I was more, I wouldn't say proficient, but as I started walking up that learning curve of management, then I noticed that my passion could really come out, right?
Yeah.
Because I was able to teach, and we were able to start having great conversations, and that's the part I think of teaching where I just fell in love with, because when you can get seventh graders are, they're they're pretty sharp, right? I
Yeah.
think I
Very
think
much.
we all kind of sometimes underestimate those middle years sometimes, like. Um, I've certainly at times, even myself, in my teaching career, preferred high school students because I think they're so much more intellectual. And in many ways, that's true. They are more mature and they have more content knowledge. But I also learned never to underestimate those middle years, right? Because those logic years, they're called logic years for a very good reason. And so
That's right.
I learned that like we could have just incredible conversations about um, you know, what it meant to be heroic, what fundamental rights are and why the Gettysburg Address matters today, right?
Yeah.
With 12 and 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
And a lot of that depended on my ability to guide and direct that, but also have some passion for it.
Yeah. That's great. All right. So lead us through kind of the next couple of steps from
Yeah.
Massachusetts. I'm interested in your kind of your career progression that led you ultimately to join Liberty's team.
Yeah. So I taught for 5 years in the middle school years in Massachusetts. And then I started working on a master's in school leadership, which was a good experience overall. I got to, I went the licensure route because I felt like I wanted to add that credential, and that allowed me to actually shadow my principal
Mm-hmm.
and complete a series of projects that were related to the school. And so, just as an example, he let me um, work on a transition plan of our 6th to 7th graders, right? So that had never been done at the school before, and that was an initiative that I got to really start. And I thought that was just an incredible opportunity for me, being pretty young in my career, being able to fall back on his mentoring, but to have ownership of something real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that experience was really helpful and started giving me a window of what it might look like to actually start leading in a school as well. And as I mentioned, as I was leading Hillsdale, Hillsdale was just beginning its Barney Charter initiative. And I had always stayed and still stay in touch with a lot of folks back at Hillsdale. But this was obviously way back in the early days, right? But
Mm-hmm.
when Mr. Kilgore was leading the movement.
Yep.
And, decided after about, 5 years, I was ready to at least consider some potential opportunities to get involved in a Hillsdale K through 12 school and see what that experience might look like. So through, communicating and staying in touch with Mr. Kilgore, that led us down to Dallas. At that time, there were a number of Founders Classical Academies that were opening. One of the flagship schools was a Founders Classical School. And so we ended up joining a year one opening school
Yep.
just outside Dallas. And I was the assistant head at that time. And then the second year, I was asked to be the headmaster. So found myself, honestly, on a faster track than I thought, right? I thought like I was thrilled with the opportunity to be an assistant headmaster. I felt even after 5 years of teaching, I still felt relatively unqualified, right? But the fact that the very next year I was leading was a big step. And I just learned so much those 2 years in Dallas. And mostly learned through humility, right?
Yeah.
Learning the tough way, making some mistakes and really attempting to learn how to grow from them. So after a few years in Dallas, we, again, really out of the blue, almost decided to come back to Boston and go back to the school where I started at. They had a position open up at the high school to oversee, to be the principal, to oversee the high school academics and operations. And, it just seemed like the right opportunity at the right time. And I would acknowledge too, we missed Boston a bit.
Yeah.
Nothing against Dallas, but
Yeah.
we missed the city of Boston. We missed the culture. We missed Four Seasons. And
Mm-hmm.
so we ended up back there for another 5 years, this time in the high school role. And it was still, it was an incredible 5 years. I had my time as the principal allowed me to overlap with some of the classes of students I had taught. And so it was a really cool experience
Yeah, that's
to
neat.
just continue to be part of their educational journey. And after about 5 years there, I was itching to get back into the Hillsdale K through 12. I think that's kind of where ultimately I knew that I wanted to be, being aligned with the classical charter mission, the idea that we can bring this type of education to more students. And so the doors opened to accept a founding head of school position in North Carolina, and worked with a really wonderful group of people down there who had worked really, really long hours to try to open a school just outside of Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And the long story short was that it didn't quite pan out the way that we thought it would, the way that they hoped it would. And sometimes that happens, right? I think we reflect on this, right? Like, it's a really hard thing to start charter schools.
Really hard.
And if you can't, there's nothing, you can't hold that against anyone.
That's right.
Because it can go wrong for a lot of reasons that are well beyond your control.
That's right.
You can work the hardest and be the bestest and still come up short.
Yeah.
And that's not a reflection of you, right? It's just the nature of our business, right?
Right.
It's hard. So that was tough, because I had relocated my family, and this was our plan to live here, to open this school, to be here.
Yeah.
And this is where our paths crossed, right?
That's right.
In Hillsdale. And
That's
so hearing about the schools here, about Atlanta Classical and Northwest Classical, hearing about the vision that you had for launching new schools was just one reason why that conversation we had was really instrumental to those next steps. And so I'm really grateful for how that worked out. And
well, me too.
It wasn't necessarily the plan, but I think it's proof that it doesn't always go according to plan at times.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think all that experience has set you up beautifully for the position you've been in now. I've always, I've told you this before, but I've deeply admired your resilience in joining our team. Liberty Classical Schools is a young organization. In many respects, we've got about 11 or 12 years of experience in operating these K-12 American classical schools. But as a standalone organization giving support to schools and launching new ones, we're pretty inexperienced. And you came in here, in a new role as one of our leadership fellows, and that was not a super well-defined position, admittedly, at the time. And so I think in your first year, we had you finalizing your PhD. We had you teaching in the middle school at Northwest Classical.
That's right.
We had you kind of designing our future systems around leadership development. And you were kind of all over the place, trying your best to do all the things that we were asking you to do, and you did beautifully in all of those. And I think since then we've settled into a great configuration where you're our new schools director, and have just been crushing it in terms of your productivity and success, and earning political approvals and finding locations and leading us into new initiatives. And I want to close our talk today. I'm going to maybe preview a little bit about our announcement that we're going to make actually later today. We're here at the very end of May 2025. And we'll get to the new announcement here in just a few minutes. But a couple of things I want to get you to talk a little bit about American classical education.
Sure.
And then I kind of want to circle back to this. There's a really interesting phrase you used earlier, and I may not restate it exactly right, but it somewhat mirrors one of our core values of sort of this notion of pursuing the American classical education as a lifestyle almost, which I don't want to weird people out and our listeners out that we're some sort of odd, cultish type organization, and because we're certainly not. But there is something about this pursuit of goodness and truth and beauty that can shape your life, and it can shape your friendships, and it can shape the world that you inhabit, and the life you make for yourself. There's a contemplative approach to this style of education where we encourage our students, and then of course as teachers and leaders we do ourselves, to sort of carefully evaluate things that have happened on planet Earth before we got here, and we try to use that wisdom to try to shape our lives in a positive way. So anyway, I'm talking too much about that. Let me get to you a little bit. How do you, well, I guess I should just simply ask you, what do you love about American classical education? What is it, and kind of what is it that's attractive to you?
Yeah, for sure. When I think about an American classical education, I go back to those formative years at Hillsdale, and again, what was truly transformative for me was just content. And again, whether that be a book that we were reading, or primary source, or I took some coursework in government, right, and readings from John Locke all the way to the Declaration. But it was just impressive to me, right, that I sort of had this idea going into college that college was going to be reading these giant textbooks and then memorizing the content in those textbooks and then taking a test, right? And what I found at Hillsdale was just not that, right? It was, there was requirements to read because we were going to come to class and just really deep dive into what the Declaration of Independence has to say. And to do that, you have to know a lot of the context, right? You have to know what was going on and why the colonists thought as they did and why King George thought as he did, right? Because we can't just assume he was an irrational guy, right? That he had good reasons for why he viewed the American colonists the way he did, for example. So anyways, this was just a whole different paradigm of learning for me, that it wasn't just a process and a memorization and then a test, right? But rather it was really immersing myself in the document and learning things about humanity and learning things about myself. And then ultimately learning some things that were true and good and beautiful. And we say that a lot in classical education, but I think it's because it is ultimately what we strive to do in American classical education. We learn things that are true in the Declaration of Independence, that we do have unalienable rights, and that we are created equal, right? And to pursue opportunity. So that's an example of what's true. And that's also good, right? I think the Declaration really reframes, and when you think about when the Declaration happens, you can really appreciate how good of a document it was, how different of a political document than had ever been written before.
Right.
And, in a world of a history of, and so I'm certainly not suggesting America's perfection, right? But in a story of civilization shows government and regimes tend to be oppressive, right? But what was so good about this document was the opposite, right? This document was setting out to form a regime that was good, right? That was founded in natural law, that was rooted in principle. That's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and whether or not the founders could do that, that's a question, right? We still have wonderful conversations about that today. But I find that to be beautiful, right? Because that is really, I think, what we're meant to do as humans. And so just in that example alone, I think that's what I want to see in our classrooms.
Yeah.
Right? When we, are teaching our kindergartners explicit phonics. Well, sure, we can teach them about the Declaration, but we know they're not going to be able to quite deep dive into it yet when they're 5. But to deep dive when they're 13 and 16, they're going to need to be able to read it well, right? And so obviously explicit phonics plays a huge role into that. I love the way that our classical education, American classical education, focuses on history and civics and spirals, right? So that they'll
That's
have conversations about the Declaration from the time that they're young to build that foundational knowledge. And then when they hear it again in a few years, they build on that knowledge again. And so I think that's just a beautiful thing about the way that an American classical education is also structured from a curriculum standpoint. It's not a once and done type thing. And when you think about the most important things that we think about in life, they're never once and done things. They're things we think about maybe for a long, long time, over and over again. And so, yeah, when I think about why I love that the concept of American classical education is that content approach, and it's also just the emphasis on truth, goodness, and beauty.
What's the connection in your mind between truth and goodness and beauty and the pursuit of content, knowledge, and then friendship? Like how do those things connect at all in your mind, or how does that all fit together? Because I think they're one of the legacies of Hillsdale, in my own opinion, is something to do with that connection. But how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in my experience, the connection has always been community, right?
Yeah.
These things are best done together. I mean, is it possible for you to be on a deserted island with some good books and pursue these things yourself? I think probably, right? Like, I think that you could make the argument that, you don't need to be surrounded by lots and lots of people with similar or not similar viewpoints to you. But there is something special when that does happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you can actually live in a community of people who are also reading these texts or also thinking about these ideas. Because thankfully we're all created differently, right? We don't all think about things the same way. And some of the most meaningful conversations are when people have shown me how to think about a text differently or an idea differently. Or I've just asked people, like, not sure how I would read this. Like, how do you read this? Or I've been asked that question myself. And so for me, that connection is really the ability to do that with others intentionally or even organically. Friendship. I love how Lewis defines friendship as the pursuit of the same thing. And so if you're fortunate enough to surround yourself with people who love the same thing, then that can be a really beautiful thing when you think about a life pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah. Well, so, sticking on the point of community and kind of thinking about how, we're launching these schools across Georgia, we're building school communities. And the school communities are comprised of various components, those being mostly students, our own employees, and parents. So I was going to get you to kind of address a couple of these. How would you, and we're doing this right now as we launch Cherokee Classical Academy, we're in the midst of trying to attract about 64 employees to get that school started. It will ultimately have well over 100 employees when it reaches its full K-12 configuration. And by the way, Dr. Stone and Mr. Carpenter and others are doing a fabulous job in hiring. But for the viewing audience, listening audience here, like if you were to speak to prospective employees, faculty, or staff members, sort of how would you sell Cherokee Classical Academy, and what's unique about it? Why would it be a good place to work? What's special about it?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it maybe is kind of been captured in some of the conversation we had. I think that the curriculum and the content focus is just, to me, it's shockingly unique. When I think about my experience, and not just mine, but our current schools, and the success that they have, and to see the graduates that they're producing this last week at Atlanta Classical,
right.
It's like, why aren't more people doing this?
Right.
Why is this model of education not in high demand? And I think it's mainly because I don't know if everyone knows about it, right? Because when we do share it with people, what we found in our outreach efforts is that they do want it.
That's right.
They just don't know about it.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times we've heard this past year from parents or even teachers, this was what I've been looking for, but never knew existed.
That's right.
I just heard it yesterday, right, on a screening call.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you have heard of that quite a bit
heard
over
that,
the 2 years, right? So I think that's the first thing that I would just want to share. And then the second thing would just be that community.
Yeah.
How often do you really get a chance to work with people, spend 40 plus hours a week with people who have the pursuit of the same thing in the way that we pursue the same thing at our schools?
Yeah.
I think that's really special.
Yeah. Now you're so that's great. You're also a father and a husband, And so raising kids, and I wonder if you could perhaps speak to the parent
Mm,
who is evaluating one of our schools. Could be Atlanta Classical, could be Northwest Classical, could be Cherokee Classical, or one of our future schools.
mm,
Perhaps there's a parent uh, who would say, gosh, my child has not grown up in a classical school, but I'm thinking about coming to your school. I'm concerned about that transition.
mm.
Like, how would you assuage their concerns? How would you speak to that parent with that kind of concern?
Yeah, even, as a parent, of course, and having my children, having the privilege of having them in one of our schools, I would just emphasize that how well cared for our kids are. And
Yeah.
I really respect the teachers and staff who know my kids, right? Which is just impressive, right?
Hmm.
Like they know them, their interests, their quirks. Hopefully not too many of their misbehaviors, but they know them as people, right? And like that is a meaningful thing as a parent to know that there are other people pouring themselves into your children.
Yeah.
I also think the, you know, I the content and opportunities in education are extremely important, of course, right? We want our children to be successful. We want them to be independent. We want them to have happy lives, right? Um, but I think if we could pick the one thing that was the most important to my wife and I for our three children, is that we're very concerned for their moral development, their
Hmm.
character.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about that,
Right.
and we feel that obligation as parents, but we know that we just can't keep them locked up in the house the whole time,
Right.
right? So where they go to school and where they spend their time, what friends they have, and what adults are in their lives, those things matter.
They do matter.
And I love that our schools focus on moral character and moral development just as much as we do intellectual.
Yeah.
Those are non-negotiables for us, and that makes us very passionate about this is the place where we want our kids to be.
Yeah. I think we've also generally observed that kids are amazingly resilient and
Absolutely.
malleable, and even though they've not necessarily grown up in an environment with a high calling towards good behavior and reading tough books, um, that there's a lot of inspiration there,
That's right.
and that they can adjust
That's right.
pretty fast. Um, I want to give you some opportunity to talk about your own studies and your PhD.
Yeah.
You've mentioned your schooling at Hillsdale, your graduate
Mhm.
degree, but in the midst of your transition to Liberty Classical Schools, you've also completed a PhD, and I think it's really, really relevant um, to your work both now and into the future. But I wonder if you could maybe, for our audience, kind of just summarize what you studied and what you learned and how that's going to contribute to your career going forward.
Yeah. The main focus of my study was on the experience of first-year teachers. So,
Mhm.
just drawing from my own experience as a first-year teacher without preparation. And I really wanted to understand um, that experience again.
Yeah.
I've had my own experience that has greatly impacted me, but I thought it would be a great opportunity while completing the PhD to also learn from others who had that
Hmm.
same experience and really just focus in on that year. And I decided to pursue candidates or research interview teachers who had a few years distance. I do think there's interest in maybe talking to teachers in the first year, but I found that there's some helpful perspective that happens
Yeah.
after that first year too.
Right.
So that's where I focused in for the dissertation research. And yes, of course, it has led to a lot of helpful perspective and insight as we are hiring teachers right now for Cherokee Classical, as we
Yeah.
have to hire teachers for our existing schools. And for me, a lot of that looks like how can we help these teachers, no matter who they are, where they come from, how can we help them be successful? Because when
Yeah.
that happens, not only do they win, but most importantly, our students
That's
win.
right. That's
And
right.
so that's really been the focus I've learned from that.
Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, as we're constantly at this point hiring and putting in classrooms teachers that are really pretty new, much like you were right out of school, maybe in your young 20s,
Yeah.
or maybe in a career transition a little bit older, but not with a great deal of direct teaching experience. What do you think are some of the most important things that we can do to ensure the success of our new hires who are less experienced?
Yeah, I think that probably the most important thing we can do is be there, be present for them.
Hmm.
They're going to have to do a lot of learning, and I will say too, like Mr. Carpenter, to his credit, has placed a lot of value on coaching and coachability of the candidates. And because there will be a lot of coaching
That's right.
when you learn how to be a teacher. But I think ultimately for us, our goal is to find ways to just be present for them, whether that's being in the hallways, being in classrooms often, right? To the point where it's not even weird, right? To the point where they just know that, Mr. Carpenter or Mr. Kirby or whoever is going to come into the classroom, and that's just fine, right? Because it's a very natural thing.
In the spirit of coaching and
absolutely,
encouragement.
Yeah, exactly. And help, right?
Right.
Because I've also learned, even from my experience leading, I don't necessarily know what are the issues on third grade teachers' plate or eighth grade teachers' plate that's got them worried, keeping them up at night. I wish I knew everything going on, right? But I don't, right? And so just being present and available and supportive can give me insights into what are those things that they need help with and support with. And then we can develop some framework and support for that.
Yeah. I think coaching, training, development, support, all these things, I love it. I love the fact that we're, our primary focus is cultivating hearts and minds of young people. But in that work, we are also in the work of doing that for adults too. We have to, and we build a calendar really that's pretty much year round that incorporates a lot of coaching, professional development, conferences, continuing education, all those things. We want to create an environment that's one that elevates the importance of intellectual development as well. And then there's a corresponding idea there, which is just, and you've alluded to this with Dr. Smith at Hillsdale, enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is amazingly impactful to the efficacy of teaching, the benefits of teaching, and to the efficacy of it. So, yeah, all those things are great. Okay, well, let's. I'm thrilled that that you've, first of all, completed that degree. I think that's kind of incredible that you did it in the midst of holding down a full-time job. And I think that's a great feather in your cap, and one for liberty as well, and one that will serve us into the future. So I think that's pretty awesome. Maybe a couple of minutes here. Let's just chat about your role for the last year and a half or so as our new schools director, and perhaps you could sort of summarize because I imagine a lot of people don't really know what's required to start a charter school. I can tell you that when I got interested in this business 13 years ago, I did not know. And of course, I've come to love the challenge of it and love the complexity of it. I think there's days I see you loving it, and other days I see you thinking this is really hard. To your point earlier, there are things that happen that are outside of our control that are sometimes frustrating, but anyway, we're obviously driven by this mission. We're driven to have a positive impact on the lives of our employees and kids and families. But what are the major elements of making a charter school get open and get started?
Yeah, for me, it's just been a great honor to be part of the process.
Yeah.
The opportunity to open a school in the fall and serve 520 new children is, I think, just incredible to do. I don't know if most people who go to work get to say that they do that for work. There is obviously lots of ways to have meaningful work, but I'm just honored to be part of that facet of it.
Yeah.
When I think about just honing in on Cherokee, since that's our school that's opening, we had to go through a pretty challenging application petition process. And in Georgia, we apply locally first, and we didn't, it wasn't the easiest pathway for that to occur, right? So we had to learn how to navigate that carefully, but also respectfully, and compliant with all the rules regarding local petition process. And then obviously working very hard with our authorizer at the State Charter School Commission to develop relationships through the capacity interview process, right? And through, this was last summer. I felt like we were in communication all the time, right? It wasn't just the actual interview, but it was a lot of phone calls and Zoom calls and communication aside from that, right? That was going on, and all at the same time, we were working around the clock on, how do we build community interest? We have a wonderful team here at Liberty that was driving that incredibly well. How do we get our word out to the community? How do we start looking for the facility? And that process, of course, too, was arduous, and we would have preferred it to be a bit faster on the
Right.
timeline,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
But we did it, right?
We did it.
And we didn't give up, right? I think that was the takeaway, right? We stuck with it. We never lost hope. There were probably times we wanted to,
Yeah.
at least speaking for me, but we did it, right? And so I think all those pieces, just having some sort of management, ownership, control over all those pieces that a lot of them aren't within our control, made it a very challenging process. But again, the reward that we're seeing now in terms of the families that are coming and the faculty that's been hired is just, you can't quite put that into words.
Yeah. It's really a heartwarming thing to see community come together
Yeah.
around this mission, and I think we are animated by the sense of joy and relief that this school will provide for so many, both as employees, people that have been looking for this kind of environment to teach in for a long time, but also, of course, students and families. And there's a lot of moms and dads out there we observe, right, that have not found what they're looking for their kids, and they are hopeful that we will be it.
Mm.
And anyway, we're delighted to be part of that. It's what drives us in many respects.
It's a testament to Atlanta Classical, Northwest Classical.
It is.
We've heard that over and over again. Like,
Yes.
like they've heard about Atlanta, they've heard about Northwest. They did not, speaking to families or employees in Cherokee, but they just did not think that was ever going to be for them, right? Location or wait list or whatever, right? Whatever factor. And so the fact that we are able to bring this to Cherokee County, it's just been everything you just said.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you've done an incredible job of kind of driving that engine forward. You've put a lot of systems and processes in place. You've documented our playbook in many respects in terms of how does Liberty Classical Schools launch a school? What are the key aspects, elements, deadlines, milestones, all of those things? What kind of people do we need to hire? When do we need to hire them? What does the budget look like? All those things. And I think you've done a great job. Mr. Kelly, our chief of staff, and I talk all the time about your immense productivity over the last couple of years. And it's kind of been building like a freight train. I think it's been really fun for me to watch because you've, as I mentioned earlier, you came into a relatively poorly defined job, which is a self-criticism, nothing of you, but you've made the most of it and you've kind of found your footing and you've gotten to a point where you're getting a lot done in a hurry. And it's been kind of cool to see you find that footing and hit that level of productivity, which actually is kind of leading you and, and all of us to the next phase. And I think since I've got you here today, I want to just chat a little bit, and we don't have to go into a whole lot of detail because we are still developing a lot of the details. This is part of entrepreneurial life. It's part of why we love this work, even though we're not like, in the high tech field or anything. We're leading these very traditional classical schools, but we're still very entrepreneurial. But anyway, so we're later today, I hope to issue a video announcement to our communities, all of our employees at all of our schools and at Liberty itself, to talk about the formation of Liberty's Central Academics Office, or the Academics Department, and its training wing, which is the Liberty Institute. And I have asked you if you would take leadership of that initiative. And more than once and with much joy, you have repetitively reminded me that, yes, you would like to have that responsibility. And I've definitely appreciated your kind of stepping into that and your enthusiasm for it and your can-do attitude. And I think this is something that, your teachers at Hillsdale and even your first headmaster saw in you was like a drive to improve professionally and to learn. And anyway, I see that you continue to do that. So I love that. But anyway, we're going to ask you to continue to oversee the new school development efforts, but we're hopefully have plans to soon hire someone to kind of maintain that position full-time that you would supervise and really ask them to learn and execute the playbook that you've developed over the last 2 years, because we think we can launch some more schools, and we're going to ask you to lead this academics department. And so at some risk here, because we're still building this airplane as we're flying it here a little bit, but I wonder if you could sort of talk about what your vision for that is, why we need it, how it will connect to the schools, just sort of maybe high level what you think about the opportunity.
Yeah, I think to me, I see it just as an incredible opportunity. And I think to summarize sort of my hope and vision, our hopes and visions is something you say, right? That we want to be known for our excellence in teaching and learning. And I actually think we already are, right, in our schools. So how to continue that vision as we grow and improve is, to me, that's the driving force.
Yeah.
We're not replacing or supplanting, right? We're only learning how we can support
Mm-hmm.
improvement and be the best schools that we can be.
Yeah.
And how we strive to do that because that's the right thing to do for our families. That's what's good for our families.
Yeah.
And our teachers.
That's right.
To make our schools a place where people want their children to be and where people want to teach at.
Yeah.
And so being excellent at anything is hard. But we're pursuing excellence. And I think that's one thing that I admire about Liberty and our vision, just in general, is that we're not afraid to pursue excellence in these areas. It would be easy to pursue being good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are pretty good at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're looking for more than just that.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the Office of Academics, the Liberty Institute, this is our attempt to move into excellence. How do we have the most excellent curriculum? How do we know that our teachers are the most excellent in their fields?
Mm-hmm.
How do we recruit the top candidates and then retain our best teachers? And how do we make our teachers the best they can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are great big ideas, but actually being able to break them down into steps that our schools, current and new, can implement, I think it's just a wonderful vision and ultimately only supports the mission that we believe so strongly in for classical education and knowledgeable, virtuous citizens. So to me, I just see it as an incredible opportunity to help us grow in that area.
Yeah. Well, indeed, it is a great opportunity, and I think you are the man to lead us into that charge and into that new phase of Liberty's development. And as you alluded, excellence in academic leadership, in teaching and in learning is at the heart of what we are and what we want to be.
Sorry.
And we're delighted to have you in that position. I think you're going to do fabulous work, and it's going to benefit our employees and our students and our families, and that's why we're doing it. So, well, I want to thank you for spending time with me today. It's been a great conversation, and I think it's probably been enlightening to our listeners. I think that by the nature of your role, I envision that you and I will have this chance more in the future to sort of talk about some of the initiatives we're working on. I'd love to bring you back on and keep our audience aware of kind of steps forward and what, of your progress in the formation of the Central Academics Department and the Liberty Institute and so forth. So we'll keep doing that if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks. Well, folks, we'll sign off now. I'm Matthew Kirby, CEO of Liberty Classical Schools. Again, this whole podcast is intended to be an invitation to you to get involved with our work. To learn more, we would encourage you to look at libertyclassicalschools.org. And we hope you take care. Bye-bye.